Alright, what's up? Today I want to talk about, or I have actually been asked, so I'm going to address reboots, remakes, retellings, kind of all of that stuff. Probably in wake of Robin Hood, but it's been out kind of 2 weeks, going on 3 weeks now. What do you call it? Yeah, for me, I look at reboots, remakes, and all of the like based on how good they are. I mean, my best example is Planet of the Apes, you know. I seen that movie or that brand as one of my favorite sci-fi stories, you know. This is madness, you know. And I love that, you know. But, yo, I thought it could never be done. I was like, yo, don't even touch it. Why touch it? You know, and because it was so masterful. It was, you know, it hit on every level, layers, you know, or every level. Some of the things that I always try to do when I write a story, and you'll see it like in my movie, The Death Pledge. Well, hopefully next year you'll get a chance to check it out. All I did in that screenplay was, remember, stay on topic, stay on subject. And that's so important because, you know, your characters can talk about kind of anything. And, you know, like with me, my mind drifts already. So I have to remember to stay on focus. If we fighting vampires, we fighting vampires. If we work in a cemetery, we in that cemetery, you know, and we putting in that work, and what do you call it? That's what we're thinking about. Now, even in real life, if characters may be talking about something else, it is sort of a distraction. So when your characters talk about something else in a story, so you can't necessarily go real life, because sometimes people are not reading a book straight through, so you got to maintain that context. So when you are writing, you know, your characters drift off, that might be the part of the book that somebody's picking it back up at. And, you know, they'd be like, yo, why are they talking about, you know, potato chips? I thought they was, you know, on a boat and they're hunting a shark. You know, they up here, you know, what does the potato chips have to do with the hunting of the shark? So make sure you always have that element in there in terms of staying on focus. All right, so let me get back on focus. Then after they, you know, that's what I liked about Planet of the Apes. They stayed on focus. Everything was about this analogy of animals or treating animals or treating people different just because of maybe how they look or what you thought about them and all that other stuff, right? So that was what made it so brilliant. And then not only that, the analogy in general was brilliant. You know, the analogy in general made us think. And so, you know, especially about race relations and how stupid racism is. You know, you have people that are achieving right in front of you and you still believe they're subhuman. You kind of hypocrisy is that, you know? You having sex with them, you having children. So racism is just stupid, you know? Racial oppression and all that stuff is just dumb. Now, I'm not going off on a tangent, but going back to Robin Hood, why I didn't have a problem with Robin Hood is because Planet of the Apes set that precedent. What did they do with the remake? They took the analogy and brought it to animals, animal abuse, animal rights, you know, not animal rights, but just, and maybe animal rights, but all that abuse and stuff. It was like, wow, I had never thought of it that way. It was another application of the story for a different message. So, boom, I had no problem. Now, stupid remakes, sure. Unnecessary remakes, retellings is unnecessary. So it all, to me, breaks down to the story. Now, Robin Hood is I believe, public domain. And everybody is allowed, means that it's in the public area arena. So anybody is allowed to write their own version of the story. And for me, you know, we've seen Dave Chappelle do a comedy version, did Morgan Freeman did one, and then my man from Gladiator did probably the best and version of the Robin Hood story, and even what you call it, 007. I forgot his name. He did a version of it. However, my version that I like, this retelling, was good because it brought out the Jamie Foxx character, and they developed that character, and they gave him, you know, it was a good inclusion. They didn't go as far as, say, the Moors' relationship to Southern Europe or Southern Europe, and how they, you know, work with the Italians and that region of the world, but they did a lot more. It seemed like Jamie Foxx knew the system of business and merchandising, you know, which was good, and it also made it an action story. So sometimes we see stories told in one genre, and then they tell it in a different genre, like Dave Chappelle did with the story, and they made it a comedy. There's probably another way to do it to make it a horror. I like the expanded historical elements of the story being more in the black element. So I really like that. I'll be right back. Hold on. All right. So that's what I like. I had to stop and get gas. But anyway, when you have something in the public domain, you can always do a different version of it. Now, in terms of remakes, you know, I'm looking to do one of my stories as a remake, and what makes me excited about it is you get to update the story. You know, they may not have had cell phones. You get to add that element into it, or whatever else that, you know, it's a retelling, it's a reboot, or whatever you want to call it. But yo, that is like a reboot is cool. Again, if you do it right, it's all about doing it right. Sure, I hear people saying, "Oh, we're tired of hearing that same old story," but there's a lot to stories that aren't always told, especially with racial stupidness, you know, racial ignorance. I don't know what we would call racial suppression. Maybe racial suppression. Women had bigger roles in certain stories, and maybe if you're going to remake it, you reboot it, you're going to bring out the female character a lot more, you know. Certainly, you know, the racial element, you know, characters in history were more dependent on you know, characters in general. I think of characters of color in general, because they just didn't give them the credit. They didn't want to show how important they were. You know, I like to say, as a person who's a historical enthusiast, a conspiracy theorist, person who explores conspiracy theorists, you know, I don't need all the facts. I just need something to point me in the right direction, and I will come up with the rest of the facts. I'll draw my own assumptions and conclusions. So, you know, stories like Christopher Columbus, you know, running into people at sea and helping him find his way, they ain't never really been made into a story. And who are those people? You know, the stories of all of the black people on the Blackbeard's pirate ship. Who are those people? They have stories, very interesting stories. Those are liberated slaves. Many of them killed their owners, killed their captives, led revolts on their ships. We ain't really seen too many of those stories. We've seen them defeated, you know, like Amistad and other stories like that, but we really haven't seen them. What was it, Dorothy Dandridge, Tremaine or something like that? We've seen them defeated. You know, they may have had a little revolt, but they continued to lose, you know. What else? What's another one? Lewis and Clark got a real good story. Roy Clark, and I don't know what his real last name was, because Clark owned him as a slave, but he led them across the West. But we don't hear Roy Clark's name because you know, that would take away the credit from Lewis and Clark. You know, they would have to go Lewis and Clark and Clark, or Clark, Lewis, and Clark, right? And it don't roll off the tongue, but that's the reality. Lewis Latimer, right? He invented the filament in the light bulb. You ain't never seen him really played up, you know, in the story. You know, Thomas Edison's the one that gets the credit. So there's so much expanded stuff that I think actually retellings are in line. Just because the telling was such a lie to begin with. You know what I'm saying? The Jamie Foxx story, I believe Jamie Foxx's character that Morgan Freeman and Dave Chappelle had played prior played a tremendous role. I think he played, even if this is a fictional story, just as a representative of the Moors. Yo, come on now. You're making him sound like he's some powerless African captive in South Carolina. Yeah, we was beat down in South Carolina. You caught us at our worst, you know what I'm saying? But in European history, Africa wasn't conquered at the time of Robin Hood. You understand? They was still strong empires. They wasn't messing with Africa, you know, at that time. So they wasn't coming across there with no major guns, and many times they didn't come across there because the Moors and the Berbers was ready for them, so they had to sail around them. And that's how they got to the Ivory Coast, and you know, exposed themselves to Africans who had never experienced them before. But the Northern Africans, they was ready for them, and that's a beautiful story. So I'm not, you know, again, like I said, bro, anybody listening, my knowledge of history, this is my favorite area. That's what I taught, right, in school. That's what I teach. I always refer back to history. If you want to debate me on history, we could do that later. But I'm just using it as a reference point, as examples. So for examples, I'm showing you why reboots are important, or how they can be important. Reboot, give you a good example of a reboot. Wizard of Oz was a 7th-time reboot movie. Okay, they finally got it good with I forgot who played Dorothy, but the last one we all know was the best retelling. But they have, if you go on YouTube, you can see earlier versions of Wizard of Oz. Some of them were about more of financial oppression, you know, and a lot of the elements of the story that the story represented. But they finally got the analogy correct in the last one that we all see retouched, remastered, and stuff like that. But sometimes reboots are in order. My favorite reboot is Luke Cage. He got rid of that tiara, got rid of that those bracelets. I love the character's concept, a black man being tested on in jail after being falsely accused. I was like, well, that's brilliant, that's genius. But then he came out wearing a tiara, chain belt, and bracelets, and I was like, if you bulletproof, what the heck you need bracelets for? You know, and a tiara, unless it blocks you from Professor Xavier, I'm down for that. You know, I'll give him the tiara back if it keep him from being mind controlled. I'm down. I'll put glitter on it. I wouldn't care. You know, wait a minute, not enough, not glitter, but you understand what I'm saying. Make it useful. Those are some of the things that I say. I'm not hating on it just because it's a reboot. I'm going to do my own version of Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll. All those things that's in the, what do you call it, public domain. I'm going to go with that. Also because, you know, the brands are big. Yeah, the brands are big. And you get a lot of people that's just interested. You know, you could do a Frankenstein anthology. There's so many people interested in Frankenstein and seeing the different tellings of it. So yeah, what do you call it? I think that would be in line. You know what I'm saying? So I will be doing that. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming with me while I got gas. Peace.